Hello, so today's video is my ultimate top 10 perfumes for life consensus list. I do this video every year, and what I do is I look at every single video that I can find over a certain time period of people's top 10 perfumes for life lists. And really what I'm presenting in this video are the perfumes that come out on top. Which perfumes seem to be the ones that are consistently rated the highest by creators here on YouTube. So if you've not seen me before, I'm Claire. I talk all about fragrance on this channel, but I'm also a scientist in real life. So I love doing these kinds of meta-analyses to try and find trends in data. I think I look at fragrance slightly differently to a lot of people here on YouTube. But if you are interested and you haven't already done so, then please do consider subscribing. And please also, if you end up enjoying this video, then please do press the like button. So let's get on with this. So first of all, I'm just going to tell you about my methods and what the data set itself looks like. So in total, I've watched 28 top 10 perfume for life videos from 27 different creators, and that's created a list of 300 perfumes. Not every creator randomly seems to select 10 in their top 10 perfumes for life lists. It's just a thing that I've seen over the years I've been doing this. Also, there was one creator who created 2 of these lists in only a 3-month period. So I've deduplicated their list, but actually there are only 3 perfumes overlapping in their top 10 perfumes for life lists, even though those videos were only created 3 months apart. When I compare this data set to last year, there are more videos within a shorter period of time, and there are also more fragrances within this data set. So last year I had to look over a 13-month period to generate a similar amount of data, which either suggests to me that more creators are doing top 10 perfumes for life lists, or perhaps because of the way YouTube's search mechanisms have altered over this time period, I am perhaps just finding more videos. So I used to just generate this list by searching by most recent, but YouTube have very handily removed that option from their search list. So I've had to use some clever code in the address bar in order to discover videos over the last 6 months. So I also did check the size of the channels that were generating these lists, and they ranged all the way from 389 subscribers all the way up to 158,000 subscribers. So we've got a good range there. The median channel size was 5.38 thousand subscribers, and actually 10 out of the 27 creators had subscriber counts over 20,000. This is important because the more subscribers a channel has, the more likely they are to be receiving PR, which can end up skewing the results. So where were these channels from? Well, over 50% of the channels, 14 of them, were located within the US. It wasn't always possible for me to actually assign a country to a particular creator, but I did notice that the second most popular location was the UK, followed by Canada, and then we also had some Polish creators and also creators located in Switzerland and the Ivory Coast. So next, let's look at the list of fragrances themselves and try to see if we've got a very popular brand here. Which are the brands that are getting the most mentions? So there were 18 brands with 4 or more mentions in these lists, and those were Bond No. 9, Giardini di Toscana, Le Labo, Liquide Imaginaires, Burberry, Lancôme and Mugler. So those 4 mentions put those brands in joint 12th place. For some of these brands it was the same fragrance coming up again and again, and for other brands the list was more diverse. There were different choices. For Bond No. 9 it was Tribeca that was mentioned twice. For Liquide Imaginaire it was one particular fragrance, it was Blanche Bête that was being mentioned 4 times. Similarly, with Giardini di Toscana, it was Bianco Latte that was being mentioned 4 times. Le Labo's and Mugler's choices were more diverse. 4 different fragrances were mentioned for those brands. But for Burberry, Goddess again was popular with 2 mentions. And for Lancôme, all 4 mentions came from the La Vie Belle line. The brands in 10th equal spot with 5 mentions each were BDK and Initio. For BDK, it was the most recent release in Pardia that got the most mentions with 2 mentions. For Initio, it was their most popular fragrance last year too, Musk Therapy, that got the most mentions at 3 mentions. In 7th place was Kayali with 7 mentions. So it was actually their liquors line that got most of the mentions with 6 mentions of that particular line. Particularly and expectedly with Angel Share, it's always a popular fragrance, but also with their new flanker fragrance, Angel Share on the Rocks. Also Apple Brandy got a mention. And finally, I think there was Love Don't Be Shy being mentioned. In fifth equal place with 9 mentions each were Byredo and also Maison Francis Kurkdjian. For Byredo, the choices were dominated by 2 different fragrances, really quite classics now, Mojave Ghost and also Bal d'Afrique. And for MFK, there were also 2 dominant lines. So one line was Oud Satin Mood, and the other line was, of course, Baccarat Rouge 540, but 724 was also mentioned. In 4th place was Guerlain with 10 mentions, and those mentions encompass both the L'Art et la Matière line, but also they're more reasonably priced lines. So, for example, Mon Guerlain got 2 mentions. The Shalimar flankers got 2 mentions. But the rest of the fragrances mentioned were part of the higher price line. So I think Guerlain's popularity might have been bolstered by them releasing quite a number of vanilla-based fragrances this year. Vanilla is always popular in these lists, and I really feel like that might have helped Guerlain to get into such a high position this year. It was fragrances like Vanilla Planifolia that did well. Things like Spiritueuse Double Vanille also did really well. So in 2nd place, there was a tie with 11 mentions each between Kayali and also Amouage. For Amouage, the choices were quite diverse. So Existence, Overture and also the Guidance line were mentioned more than once. For Kayali, it was the re-releases of Musk 12, Silk Santal and also their new release Yum Boujee Marshmallow that did well for them. So the number 1 brand, can you guess? Last year they were also number 1, but actually 2 years ago they were in 6th place. So this brand is really doing well to maintain its position. Fragrance is a very, very competitive area, but really they've had some huge hits. And of course, the biggest brand here, the most popular on these lists, is Parfums de Marly. Parfums de Marly were mentioned a massive 15 times by 11 different creators. 4 different creators had more than one Parfums de Marly fragrance in their top 10 for life list. The mentions for the Parfums de Marly really focus around 3 main lines, and of course you can probably guess some of those lines. So they were Altair, Valaya and also, of course, Delina. So what did you predict? Did you think that Parfums de Marly would come out on top in this consensus list of the most popular brands? The thing that stood out for me, having done this video over 3 years now, was that Xerjoff has completely disappeared from this list. What has happened to Xerjoff? They were in 2nd place last year, and this year they're not even in the top 18. I feel like they must have just not had a big release for a while, or perhaps people aren't mentioning their fragrances as often. I did notice La Capitale was mentioned twice in these lists, but also there was one other fragrance from them that was mentioned. But it seems like Xerjoff are just not as popular as they once were. I did also notice their sister brands, Suspiro, being mentioned a few times, but really there is no one fragrance from them that is driving them to the top of this list right now. So given the brand list, we can also look at the conglomerates that are producing the most popular fragrances. Well, it's pretty close, and it's quite hard to discern whether to count certain brands as being attached to particular conglomerates, because some conglomerates own partial stakes in particular brands. So for example, LVMH have a partial stake in BDK, but also Amouage is partially owned by L'Oreal. So do we count those brands or not? But really, if we don't count those minority stakes, in 3rd place would be LVMH, in 2nd place would be Advent, and in 1st place would be L'Oreal. So next, which are the top 10 fragrances for life? Well, I'm going to have to make a list that's longer than just 10 because there are so many ties across this list, as you might expect. So I'm going to count from anything that had 3 or more mentions in this list. So we are essentially doing a top 18 list, and in joint 5th place with 3 mentions each are these fragrances. I'm going to put them up on screen, list them because there are quite a few here for you to look through. So what strikes me about this list? Well, the thing that really stood out to me was that most of these fragrances are not recent releases. In fact, some of them are re-releases. So for example, the Kayali fragrances, Musk 12 and also Silk Santal, were re-released having been popular and been discontinued. Also, we see in this list some older designer fragrances coming to the forefront. So Versace Crystal Noir, an old fragrance that's had a bit of a revitalisation with the release of the new flanker fragrance. But still, it's surprising to see the EDP appearing in this list. Perhaps that prompted people to revisit that fragrance or to discover that fragrance for the first time this year. Also, we've got the classic Donna Born in Roma. It always does well in these lists, but it's still clearly a very popular fragrance in this list. But having said that it's mostly older fragrances that are appearing in this list, of course we have the anomaly here. The anomaly is Maison Mataha's Printemps Blanc. What is that fragrance doing in this list? It was released only in March 2025. So how has it become this popular this quickly? Is this PR? Or is this a genuine love for this fragrance? Was there one particular influencer who influenced several other influencers to get this fragrance appearing in this list? What is it about this fragrance that has meant that it's suddenly come from nowhere and entered this list? Is it truly that good? I haven't tried it. Please do let me know. I think one thing that really didn't surprise me about this list was the presence of Baccarat Rouge 540 and also Baccarat Rouge 540 Extrait. Baccarat Rouge 540, the line in general, just does well in these top 10 for life lists. I think it's just one of those classic fragrances that people look upon fondly, and I think that's why it just does well year after year. The one that really did surprise me was actually Billie Eilish. You know, I wouldn't have expected celebrity perfumes to do well in these lists, but clearly Billie Eilish must have just sold crazy amounts of fragrance, because it's sort of almost on the level of Ariana Grande Cloud with its popularity, I think. And Cloud at one point was doing very well in these lists. So notice here that neither Guidance nor Guidance 46 appears with 3 mentions, because they were only mentioned twice each. And that's unusual because Guidance was the most mentioned fragrance back in 2024. So I'm surprised to see that it's dropped so far down. Notes wise, I have to say there's a lot of vanilla and there's a lot of sandalwood here, and that's really to be expected. They're just very likeable notes, aren't they? So second place with 4 mentions each. You've already heard a few of them, but Bianco Latte was mentioned 4 times, as was Blanche Bête, and finally also Yum Boujee Marshmallow. So this really surprised me. I did not expect to see Yum Boujee Marshmallow in second place. And also it seems like Blanche Bête, which was released over 5 years ago now, is having a huge resurgence in its popularity. Or maybe the popularity never went away, but it's never charted this highly before. Similarly, Bianco Latte seems to be having a bit of a moment again, 4 years on from its original release. And maybe it just takes a few years for fragrances to filter to the top of these lists. And maybe also it's the sheer amount of dupes and clones out there that have made people try the originals. Okay, so what is number 1? Do you all want to have a little bit of a guess? Which fragrance do you think might be number 1? For once, I saw this one coming. Last year's number 1 was Une Nuit Nomade's Jardin de Misfa, and I did not see that coming at all. I was just shocked and surprised by that one being number 1, but that is not even featuring on the list this year. And, you know, it makes me wonder what made that fragrance so popular only last year and not the year before and not at all this year. And it really does make me wonder whether it's the influence of new releases. Maybe it was the releases of the Extrait versions that made people revisit their original fragrances. But still, that's by the by. The most popular fragrance this year is Valaya. Valaya is the most biche of all biche fragrances to me. If you haven't seen my Quentin Biche video, I will leave it linked down in the description box, but basically I break down his style and tell you about the fragrance ingredients that he tends to use more than others to create transparent and airy fragrances that are long-lasting and powerful. So Valaya got 5 mentions in this list, which puts it in the number 1 position. So actually we could analyse this data in a slightly different way to just see whether it's the same when we look at fragrance lines. Fragrance lines are an important consideration because when you think about a popular fragrance such as Guidance, if Guidance 46 didn't exist, would Guidance have got 4 votes? Would that have changed the results here? For example, also with Valaya, would we have got more votes for Valaya if Valaya Exclusive did not exist? It's an interesting question. So when I looked at the fragrance lines, I could see certain designer lines really charting quite highly in this list. So in 8th position was YSL's Liebe line, and it was actually 3 different flankers of that fragrance line that got 1 mention each. There wasn't a particular fragrance that stood out. It was Liebe, Liebe Intense, and also Vanille Couture that got mentioned. So in 6th position with 4 mentions each, we had both Amouage Guidance line and also Lancome's La Vie est Belle line. For the La Vie est Belle, it was Vanilla Nude that got mentioned twice, and then there were 2 other flankers. But then for Amouage Guidance, it was 2 mentions each for Guidance and Guidance 46. In second equal place, we had Baccarat Rouge 540 line. We've already heard that Baccarat Rouge 540 and the Extrait were mentioned 3 times each. Surprisingly, the Donna Born in Roma line was the highest charting designer fragrance line. And actually that was driven by popularity of the original fragrance, but also by Extra Dose, which got 2 additional mentions. And I think 1 person did mention Green Extravaganza. Also in second place with 6 mentions was, of course, Kilian's Angel Share line. And there were 3 mentions for Angel Share and 3 mentions for Angel Share on the Rocks. So also mentioned in second place with 6 mentions was the Valaya line. So actually Valaya Exclusive was only mentioned by 1 YouTuber, and Valaya was mentioned 5 times. So clearly most people do prefer the original Valaya to the exclusive flanker. That is not true for the fragrance line that is in first place. So in first place is a fragrance line that I think we could perhaps all predict might still be number 1, but I'm still a little bit surprised that a fragrance line that has been on the market this number of years is doing this well still in this list. But yes, it's Parfums de Marly's Delina line. So Exclusive was mentioned 3 times and La Rosée twice, and also the original twice, giving it a total of 7 mentions overall in this list. So did any of these results actually surprise you? I felt like this list was much more predictable than last year, where Jardin de Misfar really just put the cat amongst the pigeons. But here I felt like Parfums de Marly was more predictable. It seems like lots of people on YouTube own those fragrances. It's a very mass market niche brand, isn't it, Parfums de Marly? And I think they're just popular, they're accessible, they're easygoing fragrances for a lot of people. And I think that's why they're so popular. Also, they've got Quentin Biche, and Quentin Biche just seems to be one of those perfumers that does well in these lists year after year. So what did you think to this list? How does this list actually translate to the general consumer? Do you think YouTube is a slightly different universe? Or do you think this tallies with what you would expect? Do you own any of the top ranking fragrances? Do you think there's one that deserves to be there that perhaps isn't there? Are you surprised that some of these are still in the top 10 lists, even years after release? I'd love to know your thoughts. And if you have enjoyed this video, then please do press the like button, and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.